And just like that, we're back, and on short notice, as Nick Diaz Academy's own Nick Maximov is going to be taking on a short notice replacement in Factory X's Cody Brundage. As always, one half of your host, new Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. I suggest you do. If you have not already, you can find the man to my left, to your right, Matt Allen, on the respective socials at Matt Allen FNP. Now, Matt Allen FNP and the rest of you tuning in at home, Nick Maximov was originally supposed to be taking on Carl Roberson, a guy that you know and love. He's been in the UFC for quite some time. He also came in off of Contender Series. But for Carl, weight cutting, well, there's always complications. Now, we got to start it off right here. Do you think Carl Roberson, I mean, he hit up the IGs. He said he had to pull out due to health issues. And listen, we saw it last year, UFC Jacksonville, his back and forth with Marvin Vettori. Their first booking had to be pulled because of his weight cutting issues. Do you think it's moving up to 205 from here on out?
He might just be a big Avril Lavigne fan, because every time Carl Roberson weighs in, he goes and makes everything so complicated. And I wish it was just as simple as he's a tall, lean guy. You would think he kind of fits into this weight class, you know, but it's been time after time after time, and here he has had to move up to 205 pounds. Fought Glover Teixeira, of course. Everybody remembers that really weird fight, but you would have to imagine that has to be the move for him moving forward. Now, the weird thing for Nick Maximov is that, well, luckily this fight was on short notice to begin with, so whatever game plan he did have ready, he could throw it completely out the window, because the opponent that he was getting ready for is the complete opposite of the guy who's stepping in now on short notice for Carl Roberson.
So last weekend, we had a fight where it was Rong Zhu coming out of American Top Team. He was getting ready for Dakota Bush, a wrestler, and then on short notice, they pull the rug out from under him. He gets a striker in Brandon Jenkins, and he looks amazing. So for Nick Maximov, UFC newcomer, a JUCO All-American, he parlayed that into getting into MMA at a very young age. Had all of his amateur fights in one summer, obviously undefeated at a crisp 6-0, and if you missed our original prediction video, you can check it out for that Roberson fight that he was supposed to have. But going into that one, it was interesting. He took on a guy in Oscar Cota up at 265 pounds. His opponent weighed 263. For Maximov, he weighed in at 209, but obviously the sentiment, the idea was he's going to move back down to middleweight. Dana White said, this is the perfect character guy for us to bring on to our season of The Ultimate Fighter that concludes this weekend when we have the title fight at 145 pounds. But for Maximov, he just gets to jump the line, wait a little bit, and ultimately earn his shot in the UFC. But now he's going to be taking on Cody Brundage, a guy that was supposed to make his second time out on Dana White's Contender Series in, well, not that long from now. So he was already getting ready. He was already in fight camp, getting ready for Shante Barnes. That was going to be on October the 5th. Matt, you kind of previewed it a little bit, but Cody Brundage is, of course, a high school wrestler. He went to Division II. He was a qualifier 2 different times for Division II wrestling. But you see it in his performances. You see it in the manner that he fights. And even when he took on William Knight on Dana White's Contender Series, where he did get finished, I don't know about you, I went back and watched that fight 2 times. Cody Brundage had a wicked amount of success in that fight.
He really does. And the thing about Cody Brundage is that he does what we both love. He doesn't stop at one takedown attempt. He will chain multiples together. And that's going to be something that, if he does stick around, and the great thing about stepping up on short notice for the UFC is, even if you lose in devastating fashion in your debut, you're probably going to get another chance out. But for Brundage, he has that dedication to the wrestling. And the one thing I will say about Cody Brundage, we kind of talked about this before the camera started rolling, he reminds me of 2 fighters kind of combined into one. Now, this might sound a little sacrilegious because, well, they're both former title challengers, but he reminds me a little bit of Chad Mendez and a little bit of Sarah McMahon in the way that, yes, he has the wrestling background, but he is a big power puncher on the feet too once he does decide to let his hands go. And I don't want to say he does not have an understanding of submissions. It's fair to say Nick Maximov is the much more credentialed black belt or jiu-jitsu player in this fight.
Brown belt in jiu-jitsu, but he's one of those guys, he's training every single weekend at grappling meets.
And he's competing too, and that's the important thing. Like, when Mickey Gall first got brought into the UFC, I remember a lot of people kept on talking about, oh, why is it a big deal that he's only a brown belt? There's tons of guys in the UFC who are black belts. But the thing that made Mickey Gall special back then, I can't believe I'm bringing up Mickey Gall to talk about positives right now, was that he wasn't just a brown belt. He competed a lot in grappling tournaments, and he knew what his skill set was at, and he was staying active with it. And that's what I really like about Nick Maximov and his game. He's not only a grappler by trade, but he's a grappler who stays grappling all the time in the offseason, and that's just something that's good to keep you fresh. There's nothing worse than Nikola Jokic, for instance, he was the MVP of the NBA season, but he had a teammate who came out and said, yeah, I heard Nikola just like goes back to Serbia, drinks beer, and the last 3 weeks before the season just tries to get into shape really quick so he's ready to go. The thing about Nick Maximov and his game that I do like is I don't really worry about him on short notice just jumping in. He is somebody who, at the drop of the hat, fought a heavyweight at the limit of a heavyweight, really, and he is somebody who is always competing, even during the off-season, if you will, although MMA doesn't have one. So I do like him a lot on these short notice opportunities.
When we look at it for Cody Brundage, who is technically the one that is coming in on short notice, you look at the losses. So he loses to William Knight. That was on Contender Series. If he missed that fight, he's all over William Knight. He's got him out back flat, and he's hammering away. I was surprised. The commentary was surprised that Herb Dean decided not to finish the fight, but it continues on. Knight just kind of powers out of the bad position that he's in. He ends up finishing Cody Brundage, who's going for a double leg takedown. And just like, I don't know, Ryan Spann, it's those elbows that really end that fight. But if you look at it, he's a former lights out champion at middleweight, at light heavyweight. And the other losses that he has on his record, although they're just amateur losses, Brian Battle, maybe that name rings a bell. Dalton Rasta, huge Bellator prospect. So the 3 losses are to really big names that a lot of people know and recognize. For Nick Maximov, I mean, you look at it. The guys that he beat before he fought Cota were 2-14. So it really wasn't the greatest record kind of coming into it. A decent win there, but you don't really gain a lot. And even in that fight against Cota, I scored at 29-28. I had Cota winning the first round. The second round was close. You really had Maximov taking over, but we didn't learn a lot in that fight.
I gotta disagree with you a lot, Craig. He fought a guy who outweighed him by almost 60 pounds. And to me,
had the garbage. It was a garbage record.
That's completely fine, but still, when somebody is that much bigger than you, normally you're going to have a massive disadvantage in every single aspect. But the fact that Nick Maximov is almost so technical that he made up for the size disadvantage, I think that is a big deal. I know you can harp on the negatives from that performance, but again, this is a middleweight who fought a heavyweight who weighed in at the limit of a heavyweight. So we can be negative about that performance, but there was a lot of extenuating circumstances that were not in Maximov's favor. So I got to be honest, I do feel like there are some positives you could draw from it.
And if we're drawing out of positives for Maximov, we know how good his grappling is. Where do you rate his striking, and where do you see it going in this division?
It's not great, and that's the problem. Like, Rodolfo Vieira, not to throw you under the bus, because I'm going to throw myself under it here in a second. Rodolfo Vieira kind of showed us what the limits are of just jiu-jitsu, good wrestling, I wouldn't say great wrestling, and zero striking. Now, the difference is, I hope Maximov has a better gas tank than Rodolfo Vieira's, because, let's be honest, I don't think it could be any worse, but his striking isn't great. And he is somebody who, if you put a pace on him, it's almost like he gets further behind than he has to be. Now, let me explain. He's a grappler first, so that's always going to come first to him. We talked about this more in the Carl Robertson breakdown, but he does have a JUCO background for wrestling. He's not somebody who just has jiu-jitsu in his back pocket. He's a very credentialed wrestler as well. But the problem is that if he can't take his opponents down, I kind of think of Gilbert Burns at lightweight, for instance. He will tire when he does strike, and more accurate guys will always be able to get from point A to point B a lot faster than he will.
For me, when I was watching a lot of Cody Brundage, I mean, the fight that he just had in LFA, he walks out to 9-5 by Dolly Parton. You love to see that. But even in that fight, little bit of a back and forth in the first round. Brundage is obviously ahead in the second round. He gets hit a little bit. He gets caught in, it was a, what was it? It wasn't a go-go choke. What was it? A buggy choke? Something that you never see. But he ends up just keeping his composure, giving the thumbs up. He gets out of it. And in the third round, again, you liken him to a lot of wrestlers. He gets a head and arm choke. You love to see that. But the things that I really had written down as far as Cody Brundage's game, it's a 1-2, it's an overhand right, and he throws a really nice leg kick too. So this is a guy that originally he was training out of Scorpion Fighting Systems. You've seen Josh Parisian out of there. He is, of course, a guy coming out of Michigan, but he moved. He's out of Factory X. He's training with the Dustin Jacobys of the world, the Anthony Smiths of the world, and for those guys, especially Anthony Smith, when he was heading into that Contender Series fight, Brundage that is, for Smith it was, he listens well in the gym, he has all those tools, it's just bringing them into the cage and putting everything together. The one last thing I have on Cody Brundage before we move on, he is married to one of Matt's favorite fighters, Amanda Bobby Cooper, Bobby Brundage, as it were. Maybe you see her in his corner. I don't know, but a great opportunity for him. He's good friends with a guy that we saw not that long ago in Colin Anglin, who ended up fighting Melzik Bogdasarian on short notice. So we get all these guys out of Michigan. Matt, when I look at the odds for this one, downright silly. Larry Enticer would like this. Are you silly? Because they open Maximo minus 350. He's now at a minus 157. For Cody Brundage, open a plus 275. He's a plus 127 at this point. We haven't seen the Tapology votes. I'm going to say over under 75% for Maximo.
Oh, it's going to be under. I feel like it'll be 64. Oh my goodness.
873 total votes, 87% Maximo, 62% by submission for the 13% that have Brundage, 44% by decision, 36% by knockout. Matt, when we were going into the original video, I had taken Carl to get the win because I thought, again, the more polished fighter, he spent more time in the octagon, trains exclusively with Beastin 25-8 Corey Anderson.
We love that.
You think a little bit of wrestling defense, maybe the fight IQ's lacking, but I chalk it all up to the fact that I think he'd be able to get the win in this one, or in that fight, rather. But seeing as how it's close and Carl makes a lot of mistakes, I could definitely see it for Maximov, who you took. When I look at this fight, Maximov, again, you're getting ready for a primary striker. You can't think, oh, Carl's going to switch it up. He's going to go for some of these weird jiu-jitsu plays because the guy is not a ground fighter. He tries, but he's not. When you're getting ready for a guy like Cody Brundage, he can put it on you on the feet, but again, he's the type of guy that motors it just like Maximov does down on the mat, which I would think favors Maximov. So when you're making a final call on this one, what are you thinking here?
So I think Brundage will win the beginning of this fight. I think he's going to start really, really quick. He's going to bring a heavy storm. And if he does land one of those big overhands, it should be a quick night in the office. And we're going to see one of those classic in on short notice, out on short notice. They win in 1 minute. But I do slightly favor the overall grappling of Nick Maximov in this fight. I think wrestling-wise, these guys are a lot closer than we've made it seem because Division II and junior college aren't that far off. We've seen guys like
Beastin 25-8.
Exactly. Curtis Blaydes, Beastin 25-8, John Jones himself. Like, there's guys out there with junior college backgrounds who go very far in MMA. It really does come down to what your MMA wrestling is. Now, both these guys have phenomenal MMA wrestling, so I don't think it's going to be a case of either guy shoots for an initial takedown and they immediately get it. We're going to get some scrambles in this fight, I think, and because of those scrambles, I do slightly favor Maximov. I think if he can find an arm, find a neck in one of those scrambles, he'll be able to latch onto a submission, and I think he'll be able to get the win if he can do that.
I can't wait to see this fight, and I would liken it a lot to the fight that Brundage had against Rasta all those years ago. I think Dalton Rasta, you throw him in against either one of these guys today, that's an awesome fight. That's a guy that the UFC, I mean, you know, going into Bellator, he's what? Either undefeated, 1-0, 2-0, so they're not going to take a flyer on him, but I think he would insert really well into this division. But every fight starts on the feet, and for that reason, I like Brundage. I just haven't seen enough of Maximov striking that it kind of scares me away a little bit. But if Brundage tires, and I haven't really seen it, that's a great opportunity for Maximov.
I will say this. If Maximov striking can ever get up to like an 8 out of 10, then we've got a real contender here. That really is the problem with his overall game. Like, it's just a fact of, can we bring the striking up to the pace of the wrestling and the submissions? Because I promise you, if he ever is able to get that striking up to the level of his other skills, and let's say he does eventually make a move to like a Sanford MMA, like a Gilbert Burns, just guys
will not happen.
No, I know. I'm just saying, guys with backgrounds like that, if he could go to some sort of striking oriented gym and maybe get that part of his game leveled up, then we could have a fun contender.
Can't wait to see it. I'm going with the short notice underdog and Cody Brundage representing Factory X. Matt's going with Nick Maximov representing Nick Diaz's Academy. Now, Matt, we got to throw a disclaimer out here. I do not like a single thing coming out of Nick Diaz's mouth this week. We both had Diaz. Let's throw it on out there. But if you want to figure out those late notice picks, those late notice ideas that we have running through our heads, especially after the weigh-ins, you can find those 2 hours before the prelims. Fight Night Picks, !kicks. If there's any late changes, if there's any late thoughts, you can check us out there. You can also tune into the Fight Companion. That's going to be for the main card of the pay-per-view. You can find that here on YouTube. Make sure you tell a friend, toss a like and a sub if you like the content. And Matt, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it.